What's up, awesome YouTubers? Ryan 1988 or Justin back here to do a video for you all. I hope you're all doing well out there. And today I'm here to do a video. It's actually kind of a updated list of a video I did 14, 15 years ago, kind of like the early days of my YouTube channel. And I was thinking about that video. And I was thinking about how my list of horror movie directors have changed over time. Some are still on this list, but it is my top 10 favorite horror movie directors and their work. And what this is the original video was a video where I did a video response to a YouTuber by the name of Dario Argento, who's not on YouTube anymore, but he was a big horror movie fan. And if you remember the early days of YouTube, you probably remember him, but he did a top 10 favorite horror movie directors and their work. And he picked a piece of their work that was either his favorite or one of his favorites. And he talked about the director, and then he talked about that movie and their work. So I thought it'd be fun to update this list because I did that video response to him years ago. Sadly, I don't think I have the video anymore, but my list has pretty much stayed the same except for some changes. Obviously, we've had other horror movie directors come out and make movies over the last 15 years. So I'm going to go over this list. I hope you guys enjoy this, but I'm also going to do 5 honorable mentions because I didn't want to leave these other directors out. Now, some of these films, a majority of them, they did direct. There is one movie in my honorable mentions list as far as directors go where he wrote the novel or the short story and he produced the movie, but he did not direct it. And then some of these other directors I'm going to talk about honorable mention-wise, they haven't strictly stuck to the horror movie genre, but they're pretty much known for that genre. So I did want to mention them. Some of my top 10 directors, they probably directed 1 or 2 films outside of the horror movie genre, but they're pretty much based within the horror movie genre. So if you see a director on my initial top 10 list and you're like, oh, he directed this comedy or this drama, he directed 1 or 2, but they're strictly known for the horror movie genre. So let's get started, though, with my honorable mentions. The first one I'm going to talk about, and you can see it in the background, is Tom Holland. Not the Spider-Man Tom Holland. I always have to joke with that. It is the director Tom Holland. So he directed, Child's Play. I almost drew a blank there. He directed a suspense thriller called The Temp. He directed a lot of things. Thinner. But he directed my favorite vampire film, which is Fright Night. And I remember being just terrified of this movie when I was a kid, but there was something about it that I just wanted to keep watching and keep watching. It was cool later on, especially getting older, that I found out that he directed the first Child's Play movie because that is my favorite Child's Play film of the franchise. I prefer the scary side of Chucky over the comedy, and I feel like as the movies went on, there was that comedic charm that works, but for me, I love the scares, and I think the first Child's Play movie is definitely quite eerie and scary. Fright Night has some of that comedy in it, but it really has a lot of other different emotions and different genres in there. You know, it has a love story, it has the comedy, it has the heart, but it also has the terror, and I absolutely love Fright Night, and I love Tom Holland's, stuff that he's wrote and acted in, Psycho 2 being one of them. I really love that. My next honorable mention is Clive Barker. So I could have picked Hellraiser. I love Hellraiser, but I actually prefer Candyman over Hellraiser. And this one's directed by Bernard Rose, but Clive Barker wrote the novel or the short story, and he was definitely involved with this movie. One of the scariest films for me growing up. It took me a while to rewatch it. I remember seeing it as a kid and just being quite creeped out by it. But I love the performances, love the acting. this is definitely one of my favorites. So again, Clive Barker did not direct this movie, but he was definitely involved with it, and you could see his influence there. So Candyman, Clive Barker, had to mention him. Lumberto Baba, definitely wanted to mention him. I love a good majority of his work, but the ones that come to mind are like Demons and Demons 2, with Demons being my favorite of the two movies. Still holds up well today. I remember seeing this for the first time back in '09 and falling in love with it right away, and I still love it today, and he's definitely a director that I wanted to mention. I wanted to mention him because he just recently passed away. William Friedkin and The Exorcist. So he's an honorable mention because he was a director that very talently, with his talent, was able to go on and direct different genres of films. He always dived back into the horror movie suspense genre, but he directed a lot of other great things. The Boys in the Band being one of my favorites, but The Exorcist is definitely my favorite of his work, and so I wanted to mention William. Rest in peace to him, and this movie right here. I love this movie, and William Friedkin will definitely be missed. And the last honorable mention is another director that's no longer with us. Passed away tragically in a car accident, I think back in '09. Very sad. And that is Bob Clark. And of course, he directed a whole bunch of different films, different genres of work. He would always come back to the horror movie genre, but he directed a lot of other different things. He directed A Christmas Story, which is my favorite Christmas movie. But my second favorite Christmas movie is Black Christmas. And he directed this 10 years or 8 years prior to directing A Christmas Story. So I wanted to mention Bob Clark, one of the scariest movies of all time for me, and just creepy and suspenseful, and I just love Black Christmas. So wanted to mention him. And so those are my 5 honorable mentions that I want to talk about as far as directors and their work, and I love them, so I wanted to mention them at least. So going into my top 10, I don't think this director was on my initial top 10 list 15 years ago, but I recently rewatched the original Piranha, and I loved that movie. I loved it even more this time around watching it, and I love his work. From Gremlins to the dark comedy The Burbs, The Howling, though, being my favorite Joe Dante movie. And Joe Dante definitely deserves to be on this list now. Seeing a lot of his work later on, growing, and as I'm getting older, appreciating his work more and more each time I watch it. The Howling being my favorite of his work. And I just love this. This is... it goes back and forth between American Werewolf in London and this being my favorite werewolf movie. But if American Werewolf in London is my favorite werewolf movie, The Howling is my second favorite. It's suspenseful. It has that dark comedy in it a little bit. Joe Dante always brings that into the horror movies he directs. There is that comedy there in some spots. But this is such a great horror movie. And again, might not be my favorite werewolf movie now, but it's my second favorite one. I absolutely love The Howling. So great practical effects, great story, great acting, great scares in this movie. I absolutely love The Howling. Coming in at number 9 as one of my favorite directors, horror movie directors of all time, is Rob Zombie. I know he is 50-50 with people. Some people love him. Some people hate him. I love him as a director. I don't think, in my opinion, he's directed a bad movie. I think he has better films than some of his other work. But the one that is my favorite film of his is The Lords of Salem. What I love about this is that it's just different from his other work. Different style, different feel. I love the camera, I like the camera angles, the way he directed the movie. I love the setting. I like the colors and the moodiness about it and that wintry fall feel that the movie has. I also think it's Sherry Moon Zombie's best performance of hers out of the work that she's been involved with. And I just really adore this movie. I love it. It reminds me of like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and all those, late 60s, early 70s, The Sentinel being another one, you know, kind of demonic, supernatural, you know, possession type of horror movies. It's not really possession, but you know what I mean. So, but The Lords of Salem I absolutely love, and yeah, that's my favorite Rob Zombie movie. House of a Thousand Corpses being my close second favorite, and from time to time it goes back and forth, but what I love about Lords of Salem is it definitely stands out from the rest of his work. Coming in at number 8 is James Wan. And again, I picked my favorite film from James Wan. Now, some of these movies aren't my favorite films of these certain directors, but I think they're worth mentioning and talking about. But a majority of them, they are my favorite of the directors. But Dead Silence is my favorite James Wan movie. And I know we have Insidious and Saw and The Conjuring. Those are, you know, great modern day horror movies from the last 15 to 20 years. But Dead Silence for me is my favorite of his work. I know he's directed, you know, things outside of the genre, but he's directed a majority of horror movies, and those are some of his best films. Dead Silence is his scariest movie, in my opinion. Eeriest movie, well, he's got some eerie movies out there, but this is the eeriest movie for me. I think the one that gets under my skin the most is Dead Silence, and I think it's his probably most underrated and underappreciated movie. You know, it came out during a time when James Wan was pretty big. He was a name with, you know, Saw, and he did a movie called Death Sentence before this, which is a fantastic revenge thriller. But Dead Silence, you know, came out and no one really talked about it. It's pretty sad, but now it has this fan base and more people are talking about it and appreciating this movie. And I'm so happy with that because I really love Dead Silence. So James Wan comes in at number 8 for my favorite horror movie director of all time. Coming in at number 7 is Sam Raimi. And this is my favorite Sam Raimi movie. I love The Evil Dead. I love Drag Me to Hell. I love a lot of his other work. I know he's kind of dipped into other genres of work, which is great. But for me, when it comes down to it, he is such an awesome horror movie director. You know, Evil Dead was this low budget, you know, almost student-like film. It wasn't a student movie, but it felt like a student movie, a group of friends going out and making this, you know, crazy horror movie, demonic possession movie that still holds up well today, in my opinion. I love it. Evil Dead 2, though, in my opinion, surpassed that, and for me, it is my favorite Sam Raimi movie. I love the fact that it's, you know, almost a remake, but really a sequel. He kind of went back and put some of part 1 story into this movie, but changing it up a little bit. And then the second half of the movie is definitely the sequel. I absolutely love Evil Dead 2. I know some people say this is their least favorite of the Evil Dead movies. This is my favorite Evil Dead movie and will always be my favorite Evil Dead movie. It improves on the first one, even though the first one for me is a film I love. And it's definitely, in my opinion, better than Army of Darkness and the other Evil Dead movies. But, you know, Sam Raimi's a director that I've seen his work, and everything I've seen I've either enjoyed or loved. So Evil Dead 2, though, Sam Raimi comes in at number 7. So coming in at number 6 is probably the most recent horror movie director on this list. But he has a, you know, list of films that every movie or every project I've seen of his, whether it's TV or movies, I've loved. There's not been one bad movie or one movie or television show where I go, you know, well, I really enjoyed that one. No, I love all his work, and I truly do. But I don't know if it's my favorite of his work, but it's definitely my second favorite one, and that is Dr. Sleep, Mike Flanagan. Coming in at number 6 is Mike Flanagan. And yeah, absolutely love this. I forgot to mention Stanley Kubrick in my honorable mentions. I love Stanley Kubrick, but he went on to do different genres of work. But The Shining remains a classic in my opinion. But Dr. Sleep, in my opinion, will be a classic over time, and more people will talk about it, and more people will appreciate it, because when this movie came out, it bombed, and no one really went to go see this movie. I saw it in theaters. I loved it in theaters. I've loved it every time I've watched this movie. And he made a sequel to The Shining, but he made it his own thing too. Obviously it's based on a Stephen King book, so there's that Stephen King there. But Mike Flanagan did make it his own movie with the casting and the writing and the way the movie looked and felt, and convinced Stephen King that he wanted to incorporate Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, that way he can have that ending. And I love the ending to this movie. I love going back to the Overlook Hotel, and I love the detail that he put into this movie. Everything from like the flooring to the wall to the whatever, the stairs. Like he really put into detail what Stanley Kubrick's Overlook looked like back in 1980, and he brought that to this movie here. So Dr. Sleep, amazing, and Mike Flanagan comes in at number 6. Coming in at number 5 as my favorite horror movie director is Dario Argento. I could have went with a lot of his work because I love a majority of his work, but I went with my favorite movie of his, and that is Suspiria. We've talked about Suspiria, or I've talked about Suspiria so many times, but I really love this movie. It's a film that I watch once or twice a year. I love especially watching it around the fall season, so I will definitely be putting this movie on towards the beginning of fall, getting into that October feel. I cannot wait. But Suspiria just remains a classic in my opinion. I love the way he directed this movie. I love the use of colors that he used. I love the setting. I love the atmosphere. It's one of the scariest horror movies of all time for me, and I adore Suspiria. So that one comes in, and Dario Argento comes in at number 5. Coming in at number 4 is George A. Romero. No list would be the same without George. George has to be on my list, and he will remain in my top 10 favorite horror movie directors of all time. He's probably directed, 1 or 2 movies outside of this genre, but he's really known for the horror movie genre. But I love the different subgenres he's directed. He's not just directed zombie movies, he's directed so many other films. Night of the Living Dead is my second favorite Romero movie. It used to be my favorite, but it has to go to Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead is amazing, but Night of the Living Dead, I felt like I wanted to mention this movie because this was his directorial debut, and this is the movie that, people talk about a lot of his work, but, when it comes down to it, Night of the Living Dead is still that film, decades later, that people still talk about, and they will still talk about through decades and decades more. It influenced the zombie genre. It influenced other directors to go out and direct their own horror movies and their own movies. And when it came out, it was a different type of horror movie. We didn't have anything like this before. We saw people, zombies on screen eating other people, and it was different. Prior to this, you had pretty much like the Hammer horror movie genre, Dracula, and all those movies, which for that time they were different as well, because before that you had the Universal monsters and you had the Phantom of the Opera. But Night of the Living Dead came in during that time when we were closing out the Hammer horror movie films, and was a different film for the time. So I love Night of the Living Dead. It is fantastic. And that George A. Romero ranks in at number 4 for me. Now going into the top 3, my third favorite horror movie director of all time, and my favorite film of his is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I almost went with another work of his that I love, which is The Funhouse. And of course, he's directed so much out there. Rest in peace to Toby Hooper. I hate saying that because I wish these directors were still around, but that's life. But this is my favorite film from Toby Hooper. It will remain my favorite film of Toby Hooper's. It's in my top 4 favorite horror movies of all time. I love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've watched this countless times over the past 20 years, and it never gets old for me. It gets better and better, actually. And, top 4 is a big thing for me. It's not top 3, but it's top 4 favorite horror movies of all time. And I love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So, fantastic one. I like the grittiness. I like the suspense. Love the characters overall. And yeah, this is just amazing. So, Toby Hooper, really miss him. I wish he was still around. Ian Alive, fantastic. I love Ian Alive. The Life Force and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Poltergeist. I know there's that debate. That's a Steven Spielberg movie, but you know what? Toby Hooper directed that film, directed Poltergeist, and you see his influence in that movie. So, coming in at number 2 is another director that is no longer with us, and this still breaks my heart today. But that is Wes Craven, and I picked A Nightmare on Elm Street. So, Wes Craven's New Nightmare is actually my favorite Wes Craven movie. It's my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But I picked the original Nightmare on Elm Street because this, in the 80s, especially the early 80s, we were having a lot of slasher movies come out. And Wes Craven wanted to dive into the slasher genre, but he wanted to do something different. And he did, making Freddy Krueger a nightmare stalker instead of somebody who, instead of, your regular killer in a slasher movie, and it takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes before you fully see Freddy Krueger, which is something that I like. You see like his hat or you see his eyes, especially in the first 2 minutes of the film where Tina's in her nightmare. And the opening credits, that's a creepy moment in the movie. But you don't really see him until Tina's second dream and her demise in the movie, and he's terrifying in it. And the way that, Wes Craven directed it, the way it was shot at night, and the lighting on Freddy's face, when he says, "This is God," is so creepy. It's still creepy today. Almost, 40 years later? Next year will be 40 years since this movie came out. It still holds up, and it's terrifying, and you have the great practical effects in this movie. Of course you have like the silly moment where the mother gets dragged in the door, but you have like the moment where Nancy's walking up the steps and her feet start sinking into the steps. I love the practical use there. Of course, Tina's death where she's dragged up on the wall by Freddy Krueger, and the way they shot that with the room kind of turning around and she's having to go with the wall. It is quite amazing how they were able to do that. So, A Nightmare on Elm Street is wonderful, and Wes Craven, he's my second favorite horror movie director of all time. Now, my favorite horror movie director of all time is probably no surprise to you all, and of course I had to pick my favorite film of his. The reason why I picked this movie is, one, it's my favorite film of his, but it's the movie that not only got me into the horror movie genre, but it's the movie that made me fall in love with film. And if it wasn't for this movie, I'm pretty sure I would love movies, but I just have such a huge appreciation for this movie. I love this movie because it's an awesome film in my opinion, but I also love it because, again, it made me fall in love with movies in general. And that is John Carpenter and Halloween. Halloween, wonderful movie. I love this movie. Directing wise, it's fantastic, but the thing that really stands out for me in this movie is the writing, which not only John Carpenter wrote, but also Deborah Hill. I just love the writing in this. I think it's amazing. You could see where John wrote part of the script and where Deborah Hill wrote it, and it's just great. On top of that, you have the acting in this, which I think is great. Donald Pleasance is fantastic as Dr. Loomis. Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode is great. I love her friends, PJ Souls and Nancy Kyes in this. Just an awesome movie. Charles Cyphers is great. Nick Castle is the Shape. I know there's many other people that played the Shape, but Nick Castle is the Shape in this. And he's terrifying. You know, this is the scariest Michael Myers we've had on screen, and it still remains the scariest Michael Myers. And I absolutely love Halloween. The iconic score, the great classic opening, just amazing. And I love what I love about Blu-rays, 4Ks, and even like DVDs and even some VHS tapes. Like, you would get these great makings of these movies, and they're so much fun to go back and watch them even more a second time when you rewatch them, because you learn about more things, and it's just so fascinating how they made these movies. And so I love the behind the scenes making of Halloween. Mustafa Akkad, rest in peace to him. You know, Urin Yablans, you know, part of this movie. Joseph Wolf, so many people. Deborah Hill, rest in peace. That I can mention, and I'm probably forgetting some other people, but you know, Halloween just remains the best of the best. And John Carpenter remains my favorite director of all time, but also my favorite horror movie director of all time. So, anyway, that is my list of 10 directors, 10 horror movie directors and their work, plus the honorable mentions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed me talking about the reason why I love these directors and their movies. And let me know, who are your top 10 favorite horror movie directors? I know I left off some other great ones. Adam Green is amazing. I love Adam Green. There's so many others that I forgot to talk about, but those are the ones, especially when I go back and I look at it, you know, if I'm watching my go-to scary movies, horror movies, the directors that I've talked about are the ones that I go back to their work quite a bit, and I never get tired of their work. I love watching their movies. So, but thank you for watching. As always, you guys are awesome. You guys rock. In with the positive, out with the negative. Go eat some Skittles, and remember to always be yourself, because you're amazing and you're beautiful. And I'll talk to you guys later.